A while back, I was asked how to draw Oogie Boogie from The Nightmare Before Christmas. So I thought, as part of a new series for October, each week we'll sit down and we'll go through a character from The Nightmare Before Christmas, and this one is going to be Jack Skellington. So I've got a little circle that I'm going to be doodling in Jack, and I've also got a photo on my phone of Jack himself for reference. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put some bulky outlines in just to flesh out where I want Jack to sit on the page. So I've given him just a standard circle head at the top, and I'm finding my centre line to bring his torso down. So when it comes to fleshing out his head, I'm not being particularly neat about it at this stage. It's lots of those little sketchy lines that you see me do. So I'm going in and finding where his points are. So you'll see on Jack's face, his nose is not in the centre of his head. It's quite high up. So I've given myself a little guideline towards the top where I can put his nostrils in and just flesh out where his eyes are. Jack's not got very many features on his face, but one thing he does have are a good set of brows. So I'm putting them in over his face as well, and then just making his cheekbones a little bit fatter. So it's not just a standard circle, there's a little bit of definition to his face, and then I can come down on that centre line, and he's got a little cat as a bow tie, hasn't he? So I'm beginning to put that in. It's quite nice with the centre line because then effectively whatever I'm drawing on the left hand side of that line for the cat, I'm then mimicking on the right hand side, so it's nice and symmetrical. And all the while I'm referencing that photo. So the left ear of his cat bow tie, if you were to draw an imaginary line up, it's going to hit the left eyeball as we're looking at it. So I'm just making sure that it sits in line with the photo as close as I can. I can then go down and add in the beginnings of his waistcoat. For sizing, at this point, I am just eyeballing it. I'm not measuring it. I'm sketching out lots of little light lines, having a look at what I've drawn, having a look then at the photo. So, for example, I'm going to call these lapels, the big sticky out bits for Jack. I'm looking at how far do they go out. So I know that they go out much further than his head if I was to draw an imaginary line up. And they even go much further than his shoulders. So I know that when I come to draw these in, I've got to take these wide. I've got to take them as wide as I can go within the circle that I'm drawing. I also know that he's got a hand behind this lapel. So I'm taking it as far out as I can because I know at some point I'm then going to have to doodle something behind it. And I don't want to run out of space. And the same goes for the waistcoat that I'm putting in now. So the outside of that waistcoat, if I look back at the photo and draw an imaginary line on the outside, it's going to come up just past his head. So you'll see the one on the right, the one that I'm just doodling in here, I've taken that a little bit too wide. Can you see me look back and think, hang on a minute, yeah, that goes up to his cheek. So, and I realise I've put mine too wide, so I go back in and just give it a little shave, trim it down. I also make sure to get rid of the old lines because you don't want old lines getting in the way. They will trip you up. They've certainly tripped me up. Lessons were learnt. So now that I've got his head and his bow tie and his waistcoat in, I can then begin to flesh out his limbs and put them in, keeping it very light. I'm not going for detail at this point. I want to see that it all fits in and that I'm happy with it before I go in with pen, and then no amendments can be made. Once we start inking it, whatever goes down, that's what we're going to go with. So here I deviate slightly from the photo and I just make his sleeve a little bit more fatter so that we can see a difference between where his sleeve ends and his hand starts. It's great to have a photo for reference, and I certainly use them in most of the drawings that I do, but there is a point after you've fleshed out the basic outline and you've got everything in where you have to deviate from that photo. A photo can hold so much more detail that your drawing on this scale at this size is just never going to be able to recreate. So I go in, get my outline, but don't be afraid to deviate a little bit if you feel like something's getting lost in the photo. So don't be afraid to make something simpler. Don't get lost in lots of detail if it's starting to lose the will and you don't want to do it. So here I was about to put in his hand, and what I've noticed now going back as I've come up to put his hand in is that Jack he's not facing us square on with his head, is he? His head is tilted slightly to the side. And when I drew his face in, I certainly didn't do that. So I've gone in and put a diagonal line in. So you just see me there looking how far is his head tilting. So I can go in and put that guideline in and then just go in again with my top guideline for his nostrils and his eyes. So all I'm doing here is tilting his head slightly so that he looks a little bit more whimsical, a little bit more in thought. And that's why at this point it wasn't about putting in lots and lots of detail. Outlines first, because things change as you go through your doodle. So I've changed his eyes and his nose, and I've given his eyebrows a bit of a wonk, and I'm then just trying to go in and change his smile too, so that it all sits on one angle, which means that his head's then slightly tilted, which means then when I come in to put his hand, he's going to be resting on his hand, just quizzically thinking about the world, contemplating Christmas, all the stuff that Jack would contemplate in life. Now for his hand, it's all bones, isn't it? So I'm drawing lots and lots of little skeleton bones. So I've broken this down into 3 parts. This bit here that I'm drawing, they are vertical. Then I've come across at an angle. And the way I draw bones, very much in my head, I'm thinking of little sausages. Little sausages that are fatter at each end and get a little bit thinner in the middle. So I've come in and put those at an angle. I'm putting that guideline there to show me that's the end. And then I'm drawing little smaller sausages down here. And obviously for each finger, there will be a little sausage. And then again, just for the tips of his fingers there, I'm drawing some little sausages behind it. So for each finger, I split it down into all the different component bones, and each bone I draw as a little sausage. That's very technical, isn't it? And now, because the majority of the fleshing out has been done, there is no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing here. I'm just going in with a pencil and just darkening up all the lines, making sure that when it comes to putting that black fine liner down, I'm following the darkest line so that I don't follow any erroneous lines and I don't follow anything that I shouldn't do. So I'm just titivating, that's what I call this. I'm going in, just fleshing out as much as I can. I think this is what I would call my psyching myself up to ink it, just going in and making sure everything is how I want it to be. I'm referencing back to that photo at this point, so I'm just checking in lots of different dimensions. Does these cheekbones fit? Is everything feel okay? It's a good idea at this point just to stop and look back at it and just see how it looks, if there's anything you would change. I sometimes like to take a photo at this point because I find sometimes if you look at a photo of your drawing, you see it in a completely different light. There's been many a times that I've drawn something, uploaded it, put it online, and then when I see the actual photo back, I'm like, look at all of those things that I would change. And I don't see them when I'm looking at the photo, at my picture on my doodle in real life. I only then see them when I look through it as a photo. So that's probably a tip. If you're worried how it looks, take a photo and look at the photo instead. And you'll notice here when I come to draw in the cat's eye, not the eye, the ear, when I look back at it, I've got a fat ear and a thin ear. So I've gone back in and fattened up the left-hand ear. And it was that little mistake that then led me to, well, I'm going to have to colour this black cat in with my fine liner because obviously I've got one chunky ear now. Originally I was going to colour in with a Faber Castell black felt tip, but then once I'd done the ear mistake for the cat, it was like, well, no, I need to go and make sure this is the same colour. So I'm using the fine liner, and this kind of stays with me throughout the doodle. I don't end up colouring in anything with Jack in with a felt tip pen. I do it all with this pen. So what I'm doing then, because I now know that's what I'm going to be doing, there's a lot of definition on this cat. So there's a lot of like lighter bits where the light's hitting the cat's face. So I've not coloured those in. I've left those. They look white at the moment. It just looks unfinished. But I'm going to go in with a grey pen and draw over those. So it just helps to give the cat that little 3D-ness. So rather than colour it all in and make it a flat cat with 2 white eyes, I've kept a couple of white spaces so that I can go in there later. And it's worth mentioning that when it came to starting to outline with a black fine liner, I didn't start with Jack's head. There's a very good reason for this. Because it's the first time I've picked up this black pen to do this doodle, I'm a little bit intimidated by going straight in there on one of the most important features of this doodle, because I think it's Jack's face that's going to be the most recognisable. So I didn't want to go straight in with that black pen. I wanted to warm up with the black pen, find my groove with it. So I've gone in and found some simpler lines that I can start with. So for me, that was the cat. And as you saw, I did make a mistake on his ear. And I strongly think that's because I've just started with the pen. And if you know me, I get book sweats when I have a new journal. If I have new pens, I get the sweats of, oh, I don't want to put the new pens in the journal and make a mistake. So for me, it's a deliberate thing when I start doodling and inking something that I don't go in with the most important feature first. I've picked out all the simpler lines that I feel comfortable that I can put in. So I give myself a couple of minutes with the pen and with the doodle just to settle into bringing it all together. And then when I start to hit my groove, you'll notice that I've worked down and I'm now going to work up and around, up his arm. And the last thing I doodle is his head, by which point I've had lots of time drawing with the pen. I feel a little bit more comfortable. For me, it's building up that confidence to doodle and to draw in the last bit, which is then the most important bit. So don't be afraid when you're inking in to go with the lesser features of your doodle first, just to build up that confidence. This bit is always a bit for me that I think in my head I'd built up was, oh, okay, this, these bones are, or little sausages as we now know them. This was a big thing for me, but you can see here I'm just doing some fatter lines at the end, making it smaller in the middle of the bone, but effectively they're little sausages, aren't they? So once I've done this nice intricate little doodle, I feel like I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be to doodle in Jack's head in ink that cannot be erased. Which is at this point always makes me think, oh, I really should buy some of that whiteout stuff so that I don't feel the pressure of putting down ink. But still to this day, I've not bought it. So in we go. I'm going to start with his eyes. They're the biggest black component. They're not circular. If you look closely, they sort of slope in towards the middle. I quite like his eyes because they're not circular, in that when you draw them in, you don't have to be perfect with it. And actually, the wonkier you are with your lines, the more that adds to Jack's character. So those sort of touches really help, especially when you're putting in a doodle and you're wanting it to work. And then I'm going to go down and build up the outside of his face. Now, I start at his chin purely because it's an easier movement for me to do with my hand. I always worry if I go from the top round to the right and down, because there's a point where you can't see where your doodle's going. And I need to be in control at every single point. So I'm going in, adding that out. You'll see that his head is far less circular now. I've probably squashed it a little bit too much now that I look back at the reference photo. I think what we could have done is made his head much larger. You'll notice that I've not followed the same perspective on his hands. So his hands are much more squashed towards his face than what I've made it. Again, there are probably things I could be picky about, but I think once you take away that photo, and you're just staring at Jack, you're not looking, I know that reference photo is what I've worked from, and therefore I know the differences. But once you take that reference photo away and you just look at it for its own art piece, it stands in its own right. Nobody's going to go, oh, I think his hand's not sitting close enough to his face there. I think you've ballsed it up. Nobody's going to be doing that. So again, it's an interpretation, not a carbon copy, right? So I'm going to go in and finish up his head. I'm going to speed the video up a little bit because a lot of this next segment is me doing the meticulous white and black lines for his suit and his cat lapel. But the one thing I would say, there's two ways of doing this. You take a black felt tip pen or marker and you colour it all in black, and then you go in with a Sakura white gel pen and you put in the white lines. That was certainly what I was beginning to do at the beginning. But I changed my mind halfway through and decided that I was going to use my fine liner for the whole thing. And it's worth noticing that his lines are different on his little cat lapel than they are on his waistcoat and suit. So on his waistcoat and suit, they're all very uniform lines. The direction sort of shows you which part of the suit that it is. But on this little spiky lapel, the lines aren't uniform. They almost look like white tree branches. They're very creaky, they're very jaggedy, and they go, start from the center and they work themselves out to those spikes. So I'm not in any way being neat. And if anything, I've pulled back on the part of the pen that I'm holding so that I have less control over the nib, which means my lines go wibbly really quickly. But for this effect, that's exactly what we need. Whereas then when it comes to drawing in the straighter lines for the sleeve, I've repositioned the pen in my hand so that I've got more control. And I've gone in and I've put a key few white lines in, and then I'll go and colour in the gaps in between. It's worth noticing on his sleeve that I have kept the white outlines to the edges. So, and that's just for definition really. It's not something that's on the photo. The photo is black, whereas I've flipped it and I've done white. But I'm going to go in now and I shall hyperlapse this a little bit because I'm doing the same. I'm just following the lines on his jacket and putting in the line detail on his waistcoat. When it comes to the breast part of his waistcoat, I have gone in and just put a couple of pencil lines in just so that I've got something to follow. These lines aren't straight, which is what I start to do. They do curve. There is a curve to them where they come sort of round and down. So it's nice having those pencil lines because it helps to keep me going at the same angle all the way down. And whilst I'm using the picture for reference on which direction the lines are going in, what I'm not doing is trying to copy line for line the photo. Again, this is about that creative license, isn't it? If I try to do and count out the same number of lines, that's far too much effort. This doodle is meant to be fun. So from this, the takeaway that I'm doing, the principle that I'm following, is that the main body, the trunk of his waistcoat, the lines are quite thick. So I've sort of defined that as being quite big, whereas his sleeves and everything else, the lines go back to being quite thin. It's a nice way of being able to add a little bit of extra detail in there, and I'm much freer because I'm then not following the photo anymore. I'm just going in and building it up. I can finish off that last lapel cat spiky thing. Have we come to a decision on what we're going to call this? I'm not sure. So I'm going to go in and finish that off, and then for me, I think my black outlining days for Jack the Skeleton are finished. Insert woohoo just here. And because there's still a heavy amount of pencil work that is on this page, I'm going to go in and rub that out. It will also help to make these white lines that I've meticulously drawn in with my black pen a little bit brighter because there's a grey amount of pencil that's lurking behind there to grey that up. So go in and get rubbing and get rid of all of that pencil work. It is worth noting, depending on the pen that you have, wait a while. Don't jump straight in and rub it out because if your ink is still wet, we're going to smudge. So the final steps, I'm taking a light grey and just going around the outside edges again. So the tops of his eyebrows is quite dark and just around his chin. So I'm just going in with that little grey, especially on his hands as well, just giving a little definition to each of those bones. I'm picking one edge, so the left hand edge or the right hand edge, and sticking with that theme. So I'll go in with a little lighter one, and then I will take a darker grey and just deepen up some of those areas just so it really comes through. I'm going to add in that dark grey on the cat. We spoke about that earlier, didn't we, that I'd left that. And you can see now it makes it look like there's a little bit of shading on that cat. And then that's pretty much him done. I do take the Sakura gel pen that I was going to use and just give his eye sockets a little definition. And what I do before the ink dries is I just smudge it with my finger so it stops it being such a white contrast colour. And then I take my old-time fave, the Bic Colour Kids pens. So I'm going in and just putting the background in just to really make his white and black self pop. So lots of horizontal lines. What I'm doing, I'm starting on the left usually, and I go over to the right. And just before I get to the right-hand side where the doodle is, I bring my pen up just quickly. And that's where you'll see me go in and put a few dots in on the right-hand side. That's just me evening the colour back out. I don't like to draw all the way up to a black line because as soon as I hit that black line, the black picks up onto my pen. And when I go and sit the pen down for the next line, it's got a load of black on it. So I sort of draw across, and then once I hit a black line, I pull up really quickly before I get there. And it's easy to go in and add a few little orange dots just to re-add that colour rather than get black ink all smudged all over my nice big colour kids pens. Nobody wants that. So this is Jack Skellington. I'm gonna do one a week, I think. That's the plan, is to, this week it's Jack. I think on my list I've got Sally, I've got Zero, the Oogie Boogie, the Mare. I think that's 5, isn't it? I've certainly got 5 circles, so there will be 5 The Nightmare Before Christmas character doodles coming this way. So if you liked this, then let me know down in the comments. Give me a like. All of those lovely things that let me know that I'm doing something that you guys genuinely want to see. But this is Jack Skellington. It's Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. And I will see you next week for a little bit more Oogie Boogie scariness. Thanks for watching, guys.